Welcome to Balanced Life with Debbie Carlin Boyle. Conversations connecting to a healthier you. The show that gives you all the latest and greatest health and wellness information to inspire you to live a life of balance and joy. Debbie Carlin Boyle is a health and nutrition coach, personal trainer, and fitness instructor who helps her clients live in balance with everything that feeds us, in addition to the food on our plate. Please welcome your host, Debbie Carlin Boyle.
Hey, hello everybody, welcome. Welcome to my show. This is Balanced Life with me, your host. I'm Debbie Carlin Boyle. This is conversations that connect to a healthier you. I have lots of these conversations throughout the year. Approximately, I do 2 a month, the second and fourth Tuesday of every month. I do them live, and I do that so you can become part of the conversation and join in. And if you're watching live today, we would love to hear from you, my guest and myself. So the number here, jot this down if you're not driving, is area code 323-524-2599. That's area code 323-524-2599. And I bet if you're listening today, you're going to have a question or a comment. So check in with us. I also want to tell you that I am a healthcare professional in that I am a health coach, a personal trainer, and a fitness instructor. And I help clients, people, groups, anybody who's interested in getting self-care being number one in their life so they can live a life of joy and happiness and longevity. So if you want to get in touch with me, you go to my website for that, which is balancedlifebydebbie.com. And there is a little place that says connect with me, and you can just fill it out and we can talk and I can get to know you. It's really nice when somebody who's in healthcare can take some time and energy to hear your story, and we can kind of work backwards to help you move forward. So I'd love to hear from you. And I have a great show for you today, so I want you to, again, get involved if you can. If you can't call the phone number, I'm streaming live on my Facebook page, Balanced Life by Debbie, right now, and you can make a comment or ask a question. If you're not watching live, make a comment or ask a question after the show or whenever you see it. Even if it's already up on my YouTube channel, you can make a comment, ask a question there, and myself or my guest will get back to you post-show. All right, great. So, what does quality healthcare look like to you? Do you feel, as a patient, that you are a strong enough advocate for yourself? Well, my guest today is Rob Oliver, who has a powerful message of positivity in spite of all the obstacles that have come his way. In August of 1993, Rob was paralyzed from the chest down as the result of a body surfing injury. At 21 years old, he was confronted with major life questions and decisions. How do the obstacles in my life affect me? Can I succeed in spite of personal limitations? What makes life meaningful? Rob took these questions to heart and began his work to develop a full and meaningful life. Rob, who has had extensive experience as a patient, is also a keynote speaker, author, consultant, and podcast host of the podcast Perspectives on Healthcare. He works with medical professionals and organizations who want to put the patient back at the center of healthcare. Since his injury, Rob has accomplished what he sees as everyone's goals. He went on to complete his education with a bachelor's in psychology, followed by a master's. Rob is married to, quote, the most beautiful, wonderful woman in the world, end quote, and they have 19-year-old triplets. Today, Rob and I will discuss a patient's perspective of medical professionals as well as medical professionals' perspective of patients. So, here we go. Will you please welcome my guest to the show, Rob Oliver. There we go. There's our applause. That's our magic audience, Rob. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Oh, such a pleasure to have you. I have to say, I had the honor of being a guest on I'm not quite sure you found me, but I got to be on your podcast, and that was a lovely experience. And I thank you for that as well.
It was wonderful to have you. And I really appreciate, I mean, the podcast is all about bringing in as many different perspectives as we can. And so to me, it's not just doctors and nurses, it's pharmacists, it's occupational therapists, it's people like you who are working on, personal health. It's all of that. And I really appreciate you being on the show.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I find it really provocative, and I know we're going to kind of get into that discussion today because I'm interested in, though I've listened to some of your guests, I'm really interested on hearing what other perspectives are, but, and getting your perspective from having gone through so much, and then hearing how you on that end felt about what was going on in this end, and now you're interviewing the people on this end. I find it really intriguing. But before we get into all that detail, I want to really hear your backstory, a little bit about you, even from where you grew up and, kind of like the road you took to get to where you are today.
Sure. So I grew up out near Philadelphia, and a little place called Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Shout out to anyone who knows where that is.
I don't.
But as that, when I was growing up, I actually had a number of medical issues, and my parents said I wasn't. Some people are an accident, like waiting for a place to happen. I was more of an accident in progress. It didn't matter wherever I went, there was always something bound to go wrong, and that ultimately culminated when I was 21. And as you mentioned in the intro, I was body surfing on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, which, for anyone who doesn't know what body surfing is, it's surfing without a surfboard. Okay, your body is the board. So if you've ever seen like the kids on a boogie board, it's like that, except there's not even a boogie board. It's just you in the water. And at 21, I wasn't quite an adrenaline junkie, but I was one of those guys that I enjoyed physical activity, and whether it was riding a bike, playing volleyball, skateboarding, swimming, you name it, it was all par for the course. And here I was, we were on vacation, and there was an offshore storm that went by, made some very big surf, which to me at 21 was phenomenal, because now it's not just body surfing, but you're body surfing in some of the biggest waves I had seen. And the way that body surfing works, you swim out beyond where the waves are breaking. You kind of tread water and you wait for one of the waves to come in, and then you begin to swim forward. And the goal is for you to arrive at the place where the wave breaks at the same time that the wave does. And then it just carries you in, and it's an exhilarating rush. This particular wave that I caught, as I was riding it in, instead of it carrying me forward, it actually pushed me down, and head first, I hit my head on the bottom, and then I felt something crunch, and I heard a pop, and everything basically went cold, and I couldn't move a single thing. And so it was basically hold my breath, wait, hope, and pray.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. You were underwater at this point when everything went cold. So, okay.
Yeah. So now,
Eek.
The good news for me is that I'm a swimmer, and so I could hold my breath for a long time. But in the meantime, it's just the water is rolling me around. I have no idea how deep the water is. I don't know where I am, and I can't open my eyes. I can't breathe. My face cleared the water for a brief second, and I got another breath, and then back under. And thankfully, a friend of mine saw me, and when I didn't stand up, he figured something was wrong, and he came in after me. Now, this was in 1993, and it was okay to wear bright colors at that point. So I had on a pair of purple swim trunks with a yellow waistband and a pink pocket and just an aqua accent. They almost looked like they glowed in the dark, but that is important because they saved my life. When my friend was coming looking for me, that's what he saw, was able to get me, pull me out, and literally save me from drowning. And at that point, they airlifted me from the beach up to Norfolk General Hospital, and we came to find out that I had broken my neck at the C5-6 level, which in common vernacular, that means I have quadriplegia. It means I can't really feel or move anything from the chest down, and I've got limited use of my arms and hands.
My goodness. Were you conscious the whole time this was going on? Never lost consciousness of any kind? No.
No, I was it both a blessing and a curse in the fact that I was awake and aware of everything that was going on the whole time, even from the perspective of being on the beach, laying on the beach and having someone stabilize my head because they knew something was that bad, and having that premonition that this is not good.
Right. And you had no feeling from the chest down at that point either, right? So
exactly. So couldn't feel, couldn't move. And of course, that contributes to the fear and that feeling when you're in the water and hoping for someone to come. That feeling of absolute helplessness is, and as a person of faith, having a confidence to know that whatever happens, I've got confidence in this and I'm good to go wherever this goes. But still, as a human being, say, I'm scared, and
of course,
let's see where this goes.
Yeah. Wow. So needless to say, it was a long road for you from there on out. I'm curious. So, what were sort of your first steps? How long were you in the hospital? What was, we'll kind of segue into what the rehab was or wasn't, and what your experience has been.
Sure. So from there, as I mentioned, they airlifted me up to Norfolk General Hospital, and I was actually on a respirator for a couple days. And before we get into the respirator or the rehab side of things, I just got a quick story to tell you, and that is, my girlfriend at the time was actually on the beach and saw what happened.
Oh.
And when I was finally able to get off the respirator and to talk to her, she was literally the first person I wanted to talk to. And we had this conversation, and it was basically to say, listen, I don't know what the future holds, but it looks like there's a lot of limitations there. And if that's too much for you to handle, I respect you and I care about you enough to say, you do whatever you need to take care of yourself. And I said, I don't know what you're feeling for me right now, but if you're just feeling sorry for me, that's not what I'm looking for in a long-term relationship. And I don't know what kind of pressure you're under from other people who would say, like, you can't leave him now. This is his hour of great need. Or like I said, those people aren't a part of us. This is about you and me. And really right now it's about you. I care enough about you to give you license. You do whatever you need to, and I'll be okay. And she got really mad at me and said, listen, what I love about you has nothing to do with whether or not you can walk. I love you for who you are on the inside. And if you think you can get rid of me that easy, you've got another thing coming.
Aww.
So when you talk about the most beautiful woman in the world, and that's who I'm married to, yeah, that's the woman that I married.
I'm gonna cry.
And
good story.
Well, thank you. But there's two things about it. Number one, my very first understanding of living with a disability came with this, and that is, this physical situation does not define me. I am defined by heart. I'm defined by personality. I'm defined by character. That's what gives me value. And everything else is just window dressing or circumstance, or it's part of life. And so that understanding really helped me out tremendously. So from there, I was taken up to Philadelphia, which is where I did my rehab. And I was literally in the hospital for 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And occupational therapy every day, physical therapy every day, learning how to feed myself all over again. And then, doing mobility training. And then after getting out of rehab, that wasn't the end. There was outpatient rehabilitation. And then from there, dealing with all of the continuing, side effects of having a spinal cord injury, dealing with urinary tract infections and kidney stones, and all of those things means that I'm going to the doctor a lot more since my injury than I was before.
Than any average patient would ever, or person would have to deal with. So at that point in your life, what was your take or perspective on the medical professionals in all areas that you were dealing with? What was your perspective? Was it positive, somewhere just get me through this, or was it a bad experience? I don't want to say bad, but
it was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
One of the things that I took first and foremost was to say, I need to learn everything that I can about my situation, so that when I have a conversation with a medical professional, that I am as knowledgeable as I can be, and that we're able to have a conversation in which they see my knowledge, and they understand that I'm not there just to listen and do whatever they say. It's got to be an equal parts relationship. Okay.
So you wanted to educate yourself on everything that you needed to know about your particular injury and what was going on. I think that's it's such an empowering thing to do, no matter what your medical issue is to take control. We talked about it at the top, but I think it's so that was a really good thing, because at 21, not so much is your head in that place. You're spinning in different ways, and to have the maturity and the wherewithal to be able to educate yourself is pretty commendable, I would say.
I appreciate that. To me, I really think that I was dealing with things at 21 and learning things at 21 that I likely would not have learned otherwise, or would have learned much later in life. Mm-hmm. And so that sense of responsibility, that sense of self-awareness to say, listen, I've got to be in charge of this. They gave me this big 3-ring notebook. It was probably 3 inches thick. It was the spinal cord injury manual, and I consumed it because I felt like I need to know everything. And listen, I'll be upfront with you about this. Okay. I didn't start at the beginning, because there was a chapter in there about intimacy, and that's where I went first, to make sure that I was saving myself for marriage and everything, but I wanted to make sure that once we get married, are we going to be able to make this work? And yeah, so I skipped to that chapter first, but then I went back and I consumed everything else to make sure that I knew as much as possible. So just from that perspective, a lot of the medical professionals that I was dealing with were aware of that level of self-education, and were willing to treat me in some ways as an equal, or to respect my quest for knowledge.
Right. I was going to say your intelligence and eagerness to absorb it all, to be completely informed, so you can make informed decisions too with your life.
Yeah. And listen, not all of the medical professionals felt that same way. They didn't all, really think that I was that wonderful and exciting and that inquisitive. I remember I had one of my nurses, her name was Kathy, and she was from South Philadelphia. And if you could come up with a stereotypical South Philadelphia female, she embodied all of it. Okay. She had long black hair that went down, almost to her waist. She had fingernails that were like 1.5 inches long and painted like blood red. She had multiple necklaces and, bracelets and jewelry, and whenever she came in, she always looked like she was dressing to go out with her friends while wearing scrubs, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I totally can picture that. Yeah.
Okay. And she may have been 5 foot tall, but with her attitude, she was about 7 foot. And, and one day I'm laying in bed and they had given me some medication, and I told her, I said, listen, I don't feel well. I feel nauseous. And she drew herself up to the full height of her 5 foot nothingness and looked at me and with her South Philadelphia accent informed me, "You can't feel your stomach." And I was like, "Oh, well, thank you for telling me that. I feel much better now." And I felt like karma came around in a very harsh way, because about 15 minutes later, I did indeed puke up everything that they had given me. And she had to come in and clean it all up with the full acknowledgement, like, yeah, you remember how I told you I felt sick and you told me I couldn't feel sick? Well, I was. So there's both sides to it, that, the experience. And really, to me, what comes out of that story is medical professionals need to listen to their patients.
Yes.
Number one skill that comes for medical professionals is listen to me. Because if you listen to me, I will tell you what's going on. You can't know what's happening in my life unless you're listening.
Yes, I agree, and I'm suspect that that's why you created the podcast, so you could hear whether or not these medical professionals that, and like you said, you branch out, but are listening, because those skills, I would say in life, the number one skill somebody should carry with them always is, we're talking about skill, not an emotion, but the number one skill is to listen, to not gloss over or use your education or whatever or even your ego to think that you know better for somebody else, unless they're completely helpless or a baby or too old, or senile. Those kinds of things are different. But if you're talking to somebody, you need to listen to them and their concerns, and they're in the right mind. You need to, and it's one of the right reasons I think that health coaching is on the rise, because from the medical standpoint, doctors just are busy, especially now with this extra added nuisance of COVID here, and they can't listen to everything, so they go by sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of track. And it's never that way. It's never that way. And your living proof is, from what I can see. And, I really admire what you're doing to bring that out to the forefront. And
let me just
go ahead.
Can I react in two ways?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, I actually, in talking about people who are experiencing dementia or are senile, there's actually a need to listen to them and to be able to meet them where they are. And here's what I mean by that. People lose their memories from most recent backwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you listen to someone who is experiencing dementia and you hear the stories that they tell, it gives you an understanding of what memories they're operating from. And then it will help you to be able to frame your communication with them so that it fits within the memories that they're operating on. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I totally would give you that. Totally give you that. Yeah. So, I guess I was talking more about big decisions in life or things, that they, and I was also thinking about, I have an 11-month-old granddaughter who hasn't experienced enough life to even make a decision. However, her wants and needs are very well communicated. You got to pay attention. You can't cook or, just throw a bottle at her and think she'll let you know without being able to really speak. She's got words, but without being able to speak, even from a very few months, she let us know what her needs were. And so I guess I didn't mean it exactly like that, that you have to, be a speaking educated person in order to, for someone to listen to you. You're right. No matter what stage you're at, you should be heard, period.
Yeah. And that's the essence of being human, is we have likes, we have desires, we have needs, we have feelings, and just being able to allow somebody to express those and even meeting people where they are. Sometimes people will tell you things that are very difficult, but very difficult to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
But in listening to them and establishing the fact, listen, I'll share with you one of the guests I had on the show, a guy named Anton Gunn. He helped President Obama with the Affordable Care Act. Okay. And he said that as a medical professional and as a person in general, there are 3 questions that you need to answer for absolutely everybody that you meet. So medical professionals, you're answering this for patients, you're answering this for your staff, you're answering this for your colleagues, for everybody. If you answer yes to these 3 questions, it will help to make the world a better place. You ready for the 3 questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Go.
Question number 1, do you care about me?
Oh,
Question
good
number
ones.
2, will you help me? And question number 3, can I trust you?
Wow.
Okay. Yeah.
Those are powerful.
Extremely powerful.
And so vital, so needed. But, you know, as a patient, because I don't have the experience that you have had as a patient, but, you know, I'm older than you, and I've seen doctors for all different reasons throughout life. I had a pretty devastating accident when I was 10 years old. I was a very rambunctious kid, and I had a pull slide accident in Palm Springs and knocked out all of my front teeth, and they were permanent teeth. And at the time, it was very traumatic, and I knew I would be living with that repercussion for the rest of my life. There were no such thing as dental implants that had started here in the United States, because I'm almost 64 years old, and back then, 54 years ago, that wasn't a thing. And so I dealt with a lot of professionals in the reconstructive world, and so as my personal experience is not one of those questions that were being answered for me from until recently. I think there's a more collective. We talked about this, I know, when I did the podcast. But back then, I had my accident in the 60s. And back then, it was just like, okay, get her in, get her out. Nobody was taking a personal interest to care about me. And I really kind of had a bad experience. So it tainted all of my experiences with medical professionals. And I guess that's what I was going to ask you. Do you feel that your attitude about dealing with medical professionals and everything that you have had to deal with has changed as you aged, or is it from the very beginning? Do you feel like you were being? I know. I guess I kind of already asked this. You said there was a range.
Again, you're right in that, and that is it's a mixed bag. Okay, and when I was 16 years old, I was having a terrible time with my health. It started off with appendicitis, and that kicked off like irritable bowel syndrome. I was having such difficulty where I would go to school for a couple days, and then I was home sick for a couple days. It was my junior year of high school. It was really, really hard. And so this was the 80s, and medicine hadn't made a whole lot of progress from the 60s to the 80s, because I had a number of doctors who were like, yeah, it's just in his head and he's got to cope with it and get better and deal with it. But I had a nurse, and she said, like, this kid is sick. This kid is, experiencing physical discomfort. Like, let's meet him where he is and find out what's going on. And I actually am in contact with that nurse to this day.
Oh, I love that.
And so what I came to understand is that there are some people who are going to believe in you and are willing to listen and to hear you and to validate where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And those are the experiences that you have to hold on to, and those are the relationships you have to build.
And that's kind of been consistent throughout this. I think that's true now. you got to find those people that are going to answer those 3 questions for you, because I'm sure they exist in every single field of medicine. We're going to take one quick break here, and we're going to be right back and get into not only your experiences, but also some of what quality healthcare means to you, aside from, being listened to is huge, but aside from that, we're going to get into all the nitty-gritty of it. And remember, you can call in. The number here is 323-524-2599. If you're listening live, call in. If you can't call in, make a comment. We'll get back to you after the show. We'll be back right after this message. I have been a wine enthusiast for many decades. But for a while, I had to stop drinking wine because of the sleepless nights and the headaches that I would have in the morning, even after only one glass. Does this sound familiar? So for the past 5 years, and since the start of my show, I've been looking for a healthy wine, and finally I found the answer I've been looking for: Dry Farm wines. Dry Farm wines are lab tested for purity, just 12.5% alcohol or less, 0.15 grams of sugar or less per glass. Very low sulfites and free of toxic additives. Dry Farm wines are dry farmed with healthy, biodiverse soil, and the taste, bright and vibrant due to no manipulation. I can't say enough about the amazing wines that I've tried, and now you too can drink wine and not worry about how it is negatively affecting your health. Just go to dryfarmwines.com/balanced life by Debbie, so you too can taste the love put into every bottle. I can hear you, Rob. Can you hear me?
No, I can't.
There
yes.
we are. There we go. Okay, we got that. I want to get into sort of the nitty gritty of it. And what can you tell me? What's the definition of quality healthcare in your expertise, in your opinion?
So quality healthcare has got to start with the patient. Okay. And I mean that it's got to be beyond diagnosis. Okay. Because so many times when we go in to visit, there is just a total focus on what our diagnosis is. And I go in and I'm no longer Rob Oliver, keynote speaker, dad of triplets, wife, husband of most wonderful wife in the world. I become a C5-6 quadriplegic, or I become a kidney stone, or I become a urinary tract infection. And that's where the focus goes. To me, quality healthcare has to focus on the individual. And the next step is what we talked about earlier, that the patient has to be part of the healthcare decision-making team. Decisions can't be made for them or forced on them. They've got to be involved in this in order to make sure that the treatment that they're receiving, the plan of care, is something that is properly matched to them and is something that they're willing to follow. Because the best plan of care that doesn't include the patient's input is not going to be adhered to the way it needs to.
I agree. And I think being your own advocate, as we, alluded to earlier, is so important. So you take what information is coming at you from a professional, and you have to, again, make an informed decision on what works for you. And I also think that there is a mental component to, whether you go in for, me, I had umbilical hernia more than a couple of times because I'm a fitness person and I lift heavy weight. And, I had to make decisions, but I had to inform myself before I can make those decisions. And there are other bigger decisions like that I'm still dealing with losing all my teeth at a very young age that are still affecting my life today, both financially and mentally. And I think that you have to take care to be able to deal with the emotional stress and things that you have to deal with, whether it's a cancer diagnosis or an autoimmune disease or an accident. Whatever you have to do moving forward, you need to be in the headspace that allows you to do that. And one of the best ways you can do that is to educate yourself and know where you stand between what you're being told and what's right for you and your family, for everybody that surrounds you. It's a hard one, I think, because it's hard to find the professionals that are taking the time and are listening and are, I don't want to say sympathetic, but have empathy when they're so busy or overtired. It's a total balancing act, I would imagine.
Yeah, and even to go a step beyond that, there's more than just the diagnosis. Okay, when you look at the individual as a whole, and let me give you an example. That is, when your child, or in your case, maybe your grandchild is sick, and you take them to the doctor. Okay, your entire world is upside down right now because you care about your kids more than you care about most anything else in the world.
Yes.
And you can't go to work because they're sick. So your life is on pause. Everything, like your external life is on pause, but your internal life is in turmoil because my child is sick. I don't know what to do with them. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know how to treat them. And they're in discomfort and I can't do anything about it. And there's that internal feeling of helplessness, and you're going to the doctor and you sit in the waiting room forever. And then you get back and you sit in the office forever. And, maybe when the doctor finally gets there, you are not in the best frame of mind. You're stressed. Okay. You're anxious, and you may not be the nicest person to deal with. Okay. And I don't mean this to you specifically.
No, but I agree across the board. Anybody dealing with this.
So in that ways, the medical professionals need to have an understanding of, this is not just about my child's cold. This is about the entirety of my world being in turmoil because of what's going on right now. And that to me is something that needs to be understood. You need to look at not just the patient as a whole, but their family and the entire dynamic. It's physical, it's emotional, it's mental, it's spiritual. All of it wrapped in together is all affected at the same time.
I agree. And so what do you suggest? I mean, you've talked to enough people now and had enough experience to know, how do we change that? And like you said, there's those individuals that are already there meeting us there, but I would say the majority maybe isn't, from my experience as a 64-year-old woman. So how do we change it? How do we bring the awareness and have people slow down to see meet us where we're at?
It's interesting. You mentioned why I started the podcast, Perspectives on Healthcare. And I'm going to tell you a dirty secret. And that is, I was presenting to medical professionals and giving them the patient's perspective on quality healthcare. And sometimes I felt like they just weren't listening. So I thought, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring in other medical professionals and get them to give the information. And now I'm not just giving you what I'm saying as a patient, but I'm giving you the information that your colleagues are telling you as well.
Right. And I suspected this from the moment I listened to your first podcast, and before I knew about your accident and your experiences. I suspected this. You're doing this because you want people to know what the needs are. That's what I suspected.
Yeah. And listen, when it comes down to it, medical professionals, if you take them outside of the office and outside of that practical experience where some of them are under such tight constraints where they have 15 minutes per patient over the course of the day. Some of them are under such time constraints, 7.5 minutes. Okay. You have 7.5 minutes And in that 7.5 minutes, not only do you have to see the patient, but you've got to review their chart. You've got to do the paperwork. You've got to, like, that encompasses the entire process of seeing that patient. And so when you are able to get them outside of that experience and have them talk about it, they're a little bit more reflective, and they understand what's going on, even though sometimes the practical reality of it is much more difficult.
Yeah, I agree. So then maybe it's more than one person. Maybe they have somebody who's there, someone who is trained in that particular area of medicine, who is a side, an assistant of some kind that would really take the time and energy to hear you, and that way the person, the main doctor, if you will, does that 7-minute deal with you. But yet you're still being heard. We all feel like we're just cattle going in and out. Okay, next we're a number, and again, not every doctor is that way. Not every experience is that way. But I, again, say the majority is. So is it a solution that there's a second person or some kind of way that you're being heard and that they're working with you from an empathetic place,
Yeah. So I had on Dr. Lindsay Parks, who is an osteopathic family physician, and he said sometimes medical professionals need to empower themselves. Okay. And yes, you are under certain time limits where you have your 15 minutes. But he said, the common practice now is you get 15 minutes and it is one issue per visit. Okay. And he told the story about, he had a patient that came in and he saw him for his 15 minutes. They handled the presenting issue. And it was literally like, they talk about doorknob confessions in medicine, right? Where the doctor is headed out the door. He's got his hand on the doorknob and he says, "Is there anything else?" And the patient says, "Oh yeah." And this gentleman mentioned the fact that he was waking up in the morning with blood in his mouth and his tongue was lacerated. And the doctor came back and sat down and they talked. And what they found out was that the man was having seizures overnight. And they got him tested and they got him on a treatment plan to address those. But the common practice would have been to say, "Okay, I know you're having this issue. Let's make you another appointment and get you back in here in a couple of weeks, and then we'll talk about that." But
yeah,
medical professionals need to empower themselves and say, "You know what? Sometimes my duty to the patient is bigger than my duty to insurance companies. It's bigger than my duty to the financial. I've got to treat the people that are in front of me. That's my Hippocratic oath, to do no harm and to take care of the people that are in front of me." Sometimes they need to empower themselves. And sometimes maybe that is, as you said, a secondary person, whether it's a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, a nurse, or an attending, the person that comes in and does the blood pressure and stuff. Maybe they can listen. They can then summarize what the patient has said. And sometimes, listen, I tell a lot of stories, okay? And sometimes you could take my stories, and if you listen to them, you can kind of encapsulate them, bring them down to a 15-second explanation of what I just said. And if someone is willing to do that and share that with the doctor is going to be much better informed about what's going on. So yeah, I think that your solution of having someone else to assist in the process is a great suggestion.
I also, we alluded to this when I was a guest on your show, and I think my guess is a lot of your guests that are in more of the holistic or functional medicine field that you've interviewed have said this kind of thing. But the functional medicine doctors who really take the time, because they're all about approaching from a holistic approach and not putting the Band-Aid of medication on something that's going on. Like, again, the one-size-fits-all mentality, and I've got to get to my next patient because my 7 minutes are up. So functional medicine is exactly that. They allot that time. They may not have as many spaces in the day, but then, and the days get pushed out, but they allot the time to get the background and learn about the individual so they can get to to the core of what's going on. It's about healing. It isn't about fixing a moment. And I would think that I talked about this on your show, that there needs to be a hybrid of those two things, of learning from what functional medicine doctors are doing and having our medical practitioners kind of adopt some of that or find a way, whether it's with an assistant, to get to the core, understand what my daughter recently went through something. And luckily, she had me as an advocate to be with her. This is my youngest daughter, not the daughter who just had an at-home birth, by the way. But my youngest, she had a really bad medical scare. And so we started going down the rabbit hole of MRIs and tests and different specialists and doctors that really just gave her 7 minutes. So she finally was referred to a specialist before we took any drastic steps. And I was in the room with her. This guy walks in, and I'm like, oh, my God, he's only 12 years old. But
it's Doogie Howser.
I know. And he goes, before you say anything, I'm 33. I'm a full-on MD. He had to, because he looked at the look on our face. It was so cute. Anyway, it was the first time, and that's because he's a newer doctor, I think, that he took a good hour with her in that room with me there. And he knew that I was a health professional, let's say. I'm not a doctor. He took a total holistic approach by going back to the beginning. And his thing was, she was leaving actually to go away for her birthday to Acapulco for a week. And he said, we're not doing anything until you come back from this trip. Because I think stress, listening to her story for that 45 minutes, told him that stress was playing a part in what was going on, and that he thinks this was a drastic diagnosis, and he wants to see what the next 6 weeks bring and make an appointment in 6 weeks, and let's talk again. Lo and behold, 6 weeks later, not everything 100%, but it wasn't what we thought it was. He was right. And he subscribed, not any medication, but basically relaxation, Sure. Stress plays a huge part in our wellness. And between her work and all of her other obligations, she was so stressed that she had this situation that they were drastically going to do surgery for. And, I went, whoa, put the brakes on this. And it was the first time, and I don't know if so like I was saying, I think we're getting to a point where it is becoming there's more awareness in the medical industry that there needs to be a hybrid of functional medicine and traditional medicine meeting us where we're at. Don't you think?
No, I agree completely. And this is, don't be insulted if I give you a trite example, okay? Because of my spinal cord injury, I am much more prone to urinary tract infections. And I am on antibiotics a lot. Mm-hmm. And for anyone who has the antibiotic experience, you know that there are a number of negative side effects of being on antibiotics. And so whenever I go on them, I immediately start doing probiotics, okay? And I'm also doing yogurt and all of those things to try and help keep my system as balanced and as happy as possible. And being in the hospital, sometimes I will tell the doctor, like, I'm requesting some probiotics. And the doctor's like, we've done studies and there's no definitive medical proof that those are helpful. And this is where I would encourage patients, don't take no for an answer. I had to learn, you go back to the doctor and I say, okay, listen, these may not help according to you, but are they going to hurt me? If they're not going to hurt me, I need you to prescribe them for me. And my My literal words are this: I don't have an extensive research study. I have a study with a sample size of 1. And in my sample size of 1, I have had good results with this. And if I end up with C. diff as a result of you not helping me to get what I need to keep my body healthy, I will completely blame you. And every time it happens, I will expect you to come over to my house and help get everything cleaned up. And if you don't want to do that, then get me what I need.
You were right. You're right. And there, again, is patient being an advocate. A quick story, and then we're going to get to final thoughts. And I want you to talk about the books and where people can get them, the books that you've written. But quick story, I wanted to have natural childbirth, and this was over 35 years ago. And, we were get them in and get them out. It was a money-making thing in hospitals. And yet I wanted to be in a birthing center in a hospital in case there was anything that went wrong. And I chose a hospital, a very large hospital out here in Los Angeles that had protocol. And I had already discussed with my obstetrician exactly how I wanted it to play out. I went through something called the Bradley course back then, and it was 12 weeks of education. I was highly educated in what I wanted to do and have this become my experience. And when I got to that hospital, when I was in labor and my contractions were 7 minutes apart, they wanted to hook me up. They wanted me to get with my feet up in the air, which is completely opposite of where you should be because babies move down the birth canal, not up. That slows things down. But then again, they could give me a C-section because they slowed things down. But I was adamant about not having any kind of medical assistance unless there was trauma to myself or the baby. And there was not trauma. And as long as they told me that, because I was educated, I walked the perimeter of that hospital for 4 days. It took me almost 4 days, 55 hours to have this baby, to have her naturally. And I agreed to go back every couple of hours to be checked and to be put on a heart rate monitor for the baby. And as long as everything was okay, I wouldn't let them do that. They went against, it was against hospital policy. I was there way longer. I ended up with a natural childbirth, having the experience I wanted, and I was able to walk away 6 hours later. But I tell you, I fought tooth and comb. What's the expression? Tooth and
nail.
Tooth and nail. Tooth and comb. To make that happen. And I swore I wasn't going to let that happen the second time around, and it didn't. I made sure that it didn't. And then my daughter, knowing that story of how she was born, chose to have an at-home birth, which scared me, by the way. But nonetheless, it all went well. Rob, we're at our ending here. I think what takeaway do you want to give? What's some final words that you would like the audience to hear?
Okay. So I live in the world of analogy. A lot of times I can't tell you what something is, but I can tell you a story about what it's like. So here's my story for you. Okay. A friend of mine is a pilot, and he filed a flight plan and was traveling across the United States, ended up over the airspace in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the air traffic controller there told him, like, hey, I need you to reroute your flight plan because you're coming too close to one of the big jet airliners. And my friend's response, my friend's not the most cordial and nice individual. And so his response was, why do I have to alter my flight plan? You tell him to alter his. And the poor air traffic control guys trying to reason with him and trying to, and eventually my friend says, I'm going to cancel my flight plan. I'm going to fly visual, and that way you don't have any control over me. But his parting shot to the air traffic controller was this. He said, listen, I got one question for you. And that is, am I up here because you're down there, or are you down there because I'm up here? And the simple fact is this: without pilots, there's no need for air traffic control. And the same thing applies to the medical practice. Without patients, there is no need for the medical profession to exist. And for that reason, it has to 100% focus on patients. Instead of treating them like patients who have to come to us for care, who have to go to a medical professional to get the care they need, treat them like people, treat them like customers. And with a customer, they have other places they can go. They can see other professionals. They can go other places. And if you don't treat them right, customers are going to go away. You've got to create customer satisfaction. The same thing has to happen with patients. it's about patient satisfaction, and it's about patient-centered care, because they are the only reason why medical professionals are employed.
That's true. I haven't thought of it that way, but it's so true. Good final thoughts. Now, you've got some books and you've got your podcast. How can people access you?
Sure. So the podcast is Perspectives on Healthcare. You can find that wherever podcasts are, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast. You can go to perspectivesonhealthcare.com. It's available there. My books, I've got 2 books that are autobiographical. One's called Still Walking. The other one is called Still Falling. I thought that was a logical sequence on the books.
Series.
They're available on Amazon. You can get them there. And if you're interested, you can. There's information on the website as well, either your Keynote Speaker website or the Perspectives on Healthcare on where you can find the books.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being such an amazing guest. Do you know when the podcast that I did as a guest for you is running? I can't remember what you told me. I know we already taped it.
I can tell you in 1/2 of a second.
Okay. And go ahead.
October 22nd.
Oh, it's coming up. It's coming up. October 20. What day of the week is that?
It's either a Tuesday or a Thursday. I can figure that out here. It looks like that is I think it's a Tuesday or a Friday. I think that is
okay. I should do the calculation really fast.
I can do I don't know.
It's fine. But how can people access that? By going to Perspectives on Healthcare.
Perspectivesonhealthcare.com. Okay. It'll be on there.
Yeah.
It's also it'll be on my YouTube channel.
Oh, good. Okay.
The Your Keynote Speaker YouTube channel, and it will be everywhere that podcasts are out there. All of the major podcast platforms, it'll be there.
Great, just as we are, so everybody can see you this way too. So I want to thank you, Rob, so much for your time and your expertise and your enthusiasm, and your story is very inspirational. And I know that you do, as your keynote, as a speaker, when you do your talks, that you're a huge inspiration to all ages, and I really want to thank you for that. And I want to thank you, my audience, for joining us today. Now, if you have a comment or a question, remember, we can answer you after the show. So go to the YouTube channel, go to my Facebook page, Balance Life by Debbie. Both names are the same. And make a comment, ask a question, and we'll get back to you. And I want to thank you for joining me. And I want you to keep going out and having those conversations that connect to a healthier you. All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.